Catherine. Happy World Kindness Week. I am
And to you.
so happy to see you. You're somebody that I really look up to and admire, and
Oh, thank
I'm
you.
very glad to have you here.
It's hard to be anything but happy about kindness. Boy, we could use a little bit more of that.
100%. Where are you coming to us from?
I'm in Cambria, California, which if you don't live near here, you might not know about it. It's a great big town of about 6,000 people on the coast of California. It's near the Hearst Castle, if anybody knows where that is. So
So, Catherine, I know
it's a nice place to be a writer because there's not much here to distract you, to put it
that's definitely
mildly.
important. That's
Yeah.
definitely important. Well, I know, Catherine, so many people know about the Pay It Forward book. I know that that's probably the first connection I had with you, but I'd love to hear just more about your backstory, about yourself, and the breadth of work that you've really created and brought into the world. Can you share with the viewers that are joining us from all over the world a little bit more about Catherine?
Sure, thank you. That's a kind of a broad swath of history, but I'll try to be concise about it. Pay It Forward was actually my third book. My first novel came out in 1997, and then I had a story collection that came out, and they were very small. They were with a small press. And then Pay It Forward came out and actually sold as a book and as a movie in the same week, which made
Wow,
it a kind of a pretty life-changing week for me.
that's a big week.
Um, yeah, it was well, it was a good week. The week that the movie came out was kind of a mixed week. There was a lot of up and a lot of down about it. The movie was kind of like getting savaged by reviewers who thought it was cooler to put down a movie about kindness, and yet people were responding to it. So it was a mixed bag. People think that after that, I think people have a tendency to think, well, you break through as a writer, and then from that point on, your life is just very smooth. But actually, I lost publishers twice after that. I went through times where I
Wow.
almost ended up with a day job a couple of times. It really wasn't until I got with my current publisher, which is Lake Union, which is an Amazon company, that I really started making a steady living and really kind of finding my audience. So every time a book comes out, the people who know they are my readers know about it and hear about it and go from one book to the next. So it took me about 22 years to
Wow.
really get to not to get any success in the field, but to get to the point where I was like steadily making a living as an author. Actually, not the saddest story ever told. It's not the easiest business. I'm kind of lucky to be where I am in it. The book that I'm working on, I probably would have to stop and count. I think it's number 42. I'm
Amazing. That's
pretty sure it's
incredible.
number 42. And like the last one that I had released was, yes, I can do this. The last one that I had released was Brave Girl, Quiet Girl. You start getting confused after a while, all
Yeah,
these
I can
books,
imagine. 42, that's pretty
Yeah,
big.
yeah. I mean, you're like, wait a minute, what was the last one that came out? What order were they in? That came out in May. I have one called My Name is Anton coming out in December. People will read a book like Brave Girl and they'll think, oh, you're writing the next book. They'll say like, what are you working on now? Well, I'm working on a book that's like 3 books down from the one you just read because I'm releasing 2 a year. It's great. I mean, I'm
It's
doing what I love
incredible.
to do. It's what I want to do. I do it fairly easily. I've always written quickly. And it's just almost like playing all day.
And did you always know that you wanted to be a writer from when you were a kid?
Looking back, it was something that I always did. My mom was a writer, and she had a couple of published books when I was in like the 3 to 5 year old range. I think that probably had more of an effect on me than I realized at the time. When I was a sophomore in high school, I had a really good English and creative writing teacher who helped me identify that it was a talent of mine, that it was something I did well, which was a very unforgettable message, because it came in at a time in my life when I was hearing a lot of messages about what I wasn't good at.
Hmm.
Not very many, you know what I mean? Like it was
Yeah.
that time when kids are dividing up into cliques and people are getting left out. So it was a very life-changing thing for somebody to say, look, you have a talent. So that was when I was 14. So I think I've wanted to be a writer since I was 14, but I haven't really been serious about it, like full-time serious about it. I didn't get there until I was about in my mid-30s. And in my own defense, it's a difficult thing to get serious about because of what I kind of half jokingly call the paycheck gap. Like if you want to be a teacher or a nurse or a firefighter and you get serious about it, don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting those are easy things to be, but I am saying that once you get a job doing that, you'll get a paycheck at the end of the week.
Steady.
And right, and then you can pay your rent and your groceries and do it for another week. But there's no such arrangement for writers. I mean, you might go 10 years before you get a paycheck. So that's why it took some time to make that jump.
And do you find that creativity just comes to you all the time, that you're constantly having ideas? Where does that come from, in a sense?
I have no idea where that comes from. Wouldn't it be nice if somebody could answer the question, where do ideas come from?
Listen, what would you, I mean, you were talking about yourself as a 14-year-old, kid, and there are many
Yeah.
kids that are tuning in right now from different parts in the world that may have dreams and aspirations of whether it be becoming an author or getting a message out there into the world. Is there a message that you would want to send to them? Because I think all of us during that age are oftentimes, we can be told, no, you can't do this or you can't do that. But what message would you give to kids out there to inspire them to pursue those kind of dreams?
Okay, a couple of things. Probably that if you really want to write, it's a good idea to get serious about reading, because that's kind of how you're going to figure out what you want to write and how you want to write. I know that if there are young people listening, there are probably a lot of young people listening who are thinking, oh, I don't really like to read. Reading is boring. And I would like to say that if you think you don't like to read, you haven't discovered your stuff yet. It's almost like, and I know when I was in school, I think a lot of my teachers did me a disservice with this. And I'm sure a lot of teachers right now, don't get me wrong, there are fabulous teachers. I have had fabulous teachers. I've also had a lot of teachers who pushed books on me that were supposed to be good for me,
Mm.
and they had no relevance to my life, and they just bored the pants off me and made me think that reading was homework and something that I didn't like. So I would like to say to kids who think that they don't like to read, imagine if your teachers just played Beethoven and Bach and Brahms for you and then said, what do you think about music? And you would say, oh, I think music is boring. But you don't think music is boring. You know you like music. You like your music.
Yeah.
And one thing that I would like to say to like parents and teachers is, if kids start reading, leave them alone about what they're reading.
Hmm.
If kids are reading books about vampires, or if they're reading graphic novels or something, they're reading. Just let them read. People's taste in reading evolves. It's not something we really need to judge. And it's just, if you're a young person and you're thinking about writing, if you can find what you love to read that just gets you fired up about reading it, well, you just got a whole lot closer to what you want to put out into the world in your own writing.
And I think that reading also helps to us to actually expand our imagination, because we're placing ourselves in different worlds, and
Yeah.
suddenly we can start thinking, wow, I can do that, or I can be that, or imagine if I did this. We can start envisioning ourselves in different kinds of roles, which I think is really powerful. You know,
Yes.
Switching
And we
gears.
get to see other people's ideas. We get to see how somebody else brings an idea out of imagination and brings it to fruition. It's actually what I used to do if I was stuck for an idea.
Mm-hmm.
I would read a bunch of short stories and I would just see a bunch of other people's ideas. I didn't copy any of their ideas. It just got my own flowing.
I'm curious, when you wrote the book Pay It Forward, when Pay It Forward came to be, was there any person or some sort of a real event or experience that you had that inspired you to write that? It was because it was so super powerful. And I know the kind of impact that it's had and created movements. Was there anything that you can point to that inspired that idea?
You know, when people ask me that about most books, the answer is no. I just say no, it just came out of the ether and I don't really know where it came from. But there actually was a kind of a precipitating experience with Pay It Forward. And I've told the story a lot. You can find it online. You can find it on my YouTube channel if you wanted to hear about it at more length. But short version, I was by myself late at night in a kind of a rough neighborhood where I lived. And I had what I thought was routine car trouble, but it ended up being an engine fire, a very dangerous, catastrophic car fire. And a couple of guys who had been driving by and seen the trouble I was in pulled their own car over. They came running at me with a blanket. So, of course, I thought, okay, I'm going to die. You know, it just never occurred to me that they were like running to my aid. And they
Wow.
popped the hood of my car. And this guy just like took his bare hands in his own blanket, his own upper body, and just reached into my engine compartment and just smothered this fire by hand.
Oh my gosh.
And then the fire department showed up, which is, I think, is also kind of an interesting part of the story because it means this was back before cell phones. Okay. So nobody made a cell phone call that I didn't notice. The only explanation for the fire department showing up is somebody else was, I was at the end of a freeway ramp. So somebody else was going by on the freeway behind me and said, I'm going to stop at the next call box and call in some help for that person. So I actually had all kinds of people trying to take care of me that night. So in the confusion of talking to the fire department, these guys packed up and drove away. And I didn't even know it. Like I turned around to thank them and they weren't even still there. So it wasn't even so much that experience that caused me to write the book. It was the fact that when I got the car put back together, which amazingly I was able to do because they were there so quickly that I had to replace a couple of parts that had burned, but the car itself survived, which is very important because I could not have afforded a new one. I was very young and didn't have a lot of money back then. And so I got the car put back together, started driving the LA freeways again. And I noticed a change in myself, which is that I had one eye on the side of the road and I was looking for somebody broken down or in trouble. And if I saw them, I was going to be the one who stopped and solved their problems. So that's the part that got me thinking, okay, you get this kindness into your life, you don't expect it. And all of a sudden, it turns you into somebody who wants to bring a kindness into somebody else's life. So then I sort of had to start thinking, you know, could that work on a big scale in the world? And if it could, how could enough people hear about it? How could enough people have a thing like this happen to them that we could actually see it work? And eventually, years later, when I got serious about being a writer, it came up again as something I potentially could write about. So
Wow,
in this
that's
one very unusual, I mean, generally, my characters are not real people, my stories are not autobiographical. But in that case, I can kind of look back and track where that story came from.
and a lot of
And I
that has
never
to
saw
really.
those guys again. I never heard from them. They never
That's
came out of the
incredible.
woodwork and said that
That's a
was
really
me.
incredible. I
I
mean, a
don't
lot
know
of
if
it has
they've
to do with
forgotten all
empathy.
about it
Yes.
or
Right?
if they just
Because
never heard the story. I don't know.
I would be so curious. Who knows? They may be watching it right now. You never
I,
know.
I've
You never
told that
know.
story so many times.
That would be incredible to have them, come about, those guys that were there that night. And
A long time ago now, though. It was probably, boy, I mean, it was in the early 70s. I mean, it was, or the early to mid 70s. I mean,
wow.
it was a long time ago now. And they might not even still be alive, or it may be that it meant a lot more to me than it did to them. Like maybe it was a more forgettable thing for them than
I
it was.
doubt it. I feel like when
Oh,
we actually engage in an act of kindness, I feel like it's a story that we also tell because it does impact us in a tremendous way.
it does. And, since I wrote the book, at the time I wrote the book, I didn't know of any actual scientific studies about this. Since I wrote the book, there have been many.
Yeah.
There have been many studies that show that the person who receives the act of kindness is changed, the person who gives the act of kindness is changed. The one that I find kind of amazing is that they have found that there are actual, and I mean like physical changes, like oxytocin levels and
Yes.
things like that, in a person who witnesses
Witnesses.
an act of kindness, just
100%.
sees it, and it just changes their whole chemistry. It's really fascinating, and it lends a lot of credence to the fact that kindness can be a contagion.
And you actually said it there when you said that suddenly, as you were driving, you were looking at the road, but you were
Yeah.
also keeping an eye out. It was, in a sense, I think that's where empathy really
And I
comes
never
into
had
play.
before.
You see that? It's
And I
also,
knew I never had before. And
yeah,
not because of any meanness. I didn't wish
no,
any harm. I wasn't uncaring about the people on the side of the road. I just, as I went by them, I'd think, oh, buddy, I hope your day picks up. But it wasn't my problem until somebody took my problem and made it their problem for no other reason but that they could. And then all of a sudden I was looking for somebody with a problem, and I would say, okay, why not make it my problem? Somebody did that for me.
it's putting
There,
yourself in another person's shoes because you were in those shoes. So
yeah.
I feel like it's definitely empathy and kindness, I think, go very much hand in hand. Being able to see yourself in another individual and then wanting to go out and help. Why do you think why do you think that there's unkindness in the world? Do you have thoughts onto why that is?
I do. I do. I think, okay, several things. I think the same way that kindness is contagious, I think unkindness is contagious. I think it's generational. I
Mm.
think if you raise a child with physical punishment and verbal abuse and a lack of respect, he is more likely to grow up and show that same behavior to others. I think you remember the golden rule:
Yeah.
do unto others as you would have others do unto you. Well, it's a great rule. It's fabulous. If people really did it, I like to say, if people really practice the golden rule, the only problems left in the world would be pretty much weather related. All the human problems would just disappear and we would get along. Well, we don't really do that. I don't think that the reason we don't do it is because we're terrible people. I don't think we are terrible people. I think the golden rule suggests that we're like at the beginning of a game and we can
Mm.
set it up however we want. And instead, by the time we grow up enough to do anything to anybody, we have been done to plenty. And and that's not always the good news. So
Yeah.
I think at one point I looked at the golden rule and thought, oh, I see. What we're really doing is we're doing unto others as we have been done to.
Mm.
And that can either be the good news or it can be the bad news, depending on how we've been done to. The other observation that I would make is I think we are more afraid of each other than we necessarily like to admit. And particularly in the case of strangers. I mean, those were two grown men stopping to help I was a young woman at the time, stopping to help a young woman by the side of the road. They could feel relatively confident. I'm not sure I would have stopped to help somebody in a bad neighborhood late at night if it was two guys who'd been in trouble. I think there's just a level at which we're not sure if we can trust a stranger enough to help them. In which case I say, fine, don't have it be a stranger. Help a coworker, help a neighbor who you don't really know as well as you might. I mean, it doesn't have to be a situation that feels dangerous to you. But even with people who obviously are no physical danger to us, but we don't particularly know, I think there's just a little bit more fear of the other than we sometimes like to let on. And I think stepping over a kind of a natural boundary of how much we are expected to do for that person is an absolutely perfect way to put that fear to rest.
So how do you, yeah, go ahead.
There was a guy once who called into an interview that I was doing years ago when the book first came out, and he was talking about some nice thing that somebody had done for him. And he said, it completely changed the way I look at strangers. And that just felt like such a key point to me. We have this, what do we think of when we think of a stranger? Do we think of a nice person like ourselves who wants a lot of the same things that we want, but that we just haven't met yet? Or do we have this expectation that there's danger and competition and all these other negative qualities in a stranger? I don't know, just throwing stuff out there.
And I think that a lot of that has to do with how society sort of makes us see one another. You're talking about competition. I feel like in today's world, people are in constant competition. It's always about, well, for me to be up, somebody else has to be down. And I really don't think.
True.
Yeah, and I don't think that that's the, that's really the way. I mean, you can both be up at the same time, but it's about shifting that perception that society has, in a sense, embedded within us. Because competition isn't bad. Competition it could be a very, very good thing. But believing that in order for me to have
a healthy competition is certainly a good thing.
100%. Healthy competition is fantastic. But I feel like people sometimes can feel like, well, for me to be up, somebody else has to be down. And I think you're also bringing up a very good point in terms of the fact that there's been a lack of people trust each other less in today's world. And perhaps it's a reflection just of hardships that they've faced or hurt that they've had from people that they've trusted in the past.
Well, and I think also, unfortunately, among not everybody, but a lot of people, there's a kind of a scarcity mentality that's been built in. Somehow we've been given this sense that there's not enough.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we get this idea that if we see somebody get something, they must have taken it right out of our pocket because there's not enough. But there is enough. I mean, somebody else has success. We can be happy for them. There isn't like a finite pool of success. And now we won't have enough. It doesn't have to be that way. But it's a very common way of looking at the world. Like, I got to get my piece of the pie, and if you get a piece of the pie, then my piece just got smaller.
Exactly. But the truth of the matter is that if we all do our part, first of all, number one, it's my belief that we all serve a specific purpose. We all have our own purpose. We're all another piece of the puzzle, different shapes and different colors, but everyone the same size. Every piece has its specific place, and nobody can take over what your specific piece is. But like you said, sometimes it's very, very difficult for us to see that. And, it can make people look at others. People also, in a sense of feeling enough, people don't feel that they are enough. I think that can also be leading.
That's true. Yeah.
To
that
a
kind
place
of imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
Where we somehow feel like what we are isn't right. The only good thing I can say about all this is if people didn't have all these foibles, I would have to find a new line of work. Because this is basically what I write about, is like, why are we the way we are? Why can't we all be happy And why can't we be happy for somebody else? You know, why are we afraid of this other person, but we act like we're not? You know, like, why are we the way we are? I think we can do better, but I also think that that's kind of how I've carved out a career as a novelist, is by asking these questions. You know,
Yeah.
the
Well,
question that was on my mind with Pay It Forward, and it's still a valid question today. If we basically all say we want to live in a kinder world, I really haven't run into anybody yet who says, no, I think we're doing altogether too well for each other. So if we all want to live in a kinder world, and it's, you know, I think people get into this false idea, like the idea is to change the world from black to white. Like when people say, can you change the world? They're picturing like this utter transformation of the world where nothing is left unchanged. And that feels impossible. I say, well, of course you can change the world. Go out and do an act of kindness. There, you just change the world by one act of kindness. You know, like it can be small, it can be medium, it can be whatever. But it's very easy to just wake up in the morning and go, I'm going to do a little bit more today. I'm going to be a little bit kinder. So the question is, if you want a kinder world and it's easier to be kinder, why do we want it but not just do it? Why don't we just do it? Why don't we just be what we say we want? So that was the question with Pay It Forward. And the point of writing the book was not to answer it, because if it wasn't a reasonably unanswerable question, I probably wouldn't get a whole novel out of it. The point was to get other people asking the question with me. And in that, I think I was far more successful than I ever imagined when I wrote the book, because I was a very underpublished author and didn't even know for a fact if I would ever see it in a bookstore. So the fact that this many people are kind of working with the Pay It Forward concept is, you know, I mean, I think I achieved what I set out to achieve, which is to put the idea in people's heads that we can simply do better if we want better. I'm not suggesting it's like a completely original idea that we could be kinder to each other. But I just wanted people to ask that question with me. Well, then why don't we? Why don't we then?
and taking the space to actually answer, giving ourselves the time to really think on it and see what
Yeah.
the steps that we can do to help us get
And
to where
just
we
take
want to
it out
be.
into the world and try it out, you know, like just go forward into your day. Like, well, what would I do today? I don't know. People used to write to me and say, well, I want to pay it forward, but I don't have any ideas. And first of all, I'm thinking, wow, I can't imagine looking around and not seeing anybody with a need. But what I would usually say is, don't sit alone in your room and try to think of something. Just walk out into the world and look at the people around you and be open to the idea that somebody might have a need that you can fill. Because as far as I'm concerned, when you do that, you have already changed the world. You have, before you ever find something to do and do it, you have made a small change to the world by walking through your life, paying attention to the people around you and what they need. Because for the most part, we don't do that, because other people's needs are incredibly overwhelming, and we're a little bit overwhelmed with our own lives. And we just don't really want to soak up what kind of problems everybody else is having. But once you make up your mind that you're just going to do a Pay It Forward act or 3 Pay It Forward acts, and that's handleable. So then you go back to paying attention to what's going on with the people around you, and that's huge.
It's awareness. It's all about increasing our awareness to
Awareness,
see
yeah.
the opportunities that are around us.
And it's empathy, as you were talking about. It allows us to tap back into empathy. Oh, that person has a problem. That must feel terrible. Could I do something about that? So often when somebody else has a problem, it's something that would be so simple for us to solve. Like somebody might not be able to afford something that they need. I could write a check and not even feel it. But even if it's not money, let's say your car is broken down and you need to get someplace 20 miles away. That's almost insurmountable. my car runs. That's nothing to me. That's 10 minutes out of my way. So often somebody else has an almost insurmountable problem that for us would just be nothing. It would just be such an insignificant little contribution from our day. And once we start opening ourselves up to those things, it's just a whole different way of moving through the world.
I feel like in a sense, it's sort of recognizing that we're all interconnected and that the
Yeah.
actions that are done in one place
Oh,
really have
absolutely.
created tremendous impact. And the tools that you've been given in your toolkit, somebody else doesn't have that tool in their toolkit. And it's so easy for you. You can do it. And the tool that they have in their toolkit, they can use it to do something for another.
Yeah.
And I think once we recognize that interconnectedness, our awareness increases even more and even more.
Yes. And then we have that empathy because we don't feel separate from the people we see around us.
I love
You
that.
know, we feel like we're kind of more like all one community. It's
I know
really
that.
not hard to do at all. And the person who does it is going to be just as happy as the person who receives it. There's really no downside to it that I'm aware of. I mean, assuming that you choose something, as I say, that feels physically safe.
Of course.
I know of no downside to it, particularly for children. You know, I always say that if you're recommending this for children, it should be something that they do with their parents or in a classroom setting. I mean, it's wonderful if a class full of kids does a coat drive for homeless people. It's not necessarily wonderful to tell your kid to go find some homeless people and see what they need. I mean, you know, a little bit
100%.
just common sense, safety.
But I also sort of feel like a lot of people, when they hear the word, kindness or, paying it forward, however we want to say it, it doesn't only have to be these, you know, acts where you're going out and doing maybe for people that you don't know. It can also, I sometimes feel that doing kindness for the people that are closest to us
Mm-hmm.
is actually the hardest. Do you find that to be?
Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes it is. I think my favorite, personal favorite, because it's safe, and for a lot of reasons, would be the person who is around you all the time, but somehow you've never broken through into a real trust level with that person. Your
Hmm.
neighbor who you say hello to, but don't really know. Or the coworker who you see every day, but there's no real connection there.
Hmm.
It's just so, once you do that, there will always be a connection there. But I mean, it certainly can be the people who are closest to us. And the other thing is, it doesn't have to be something huge.
No.
It could be the tiniest thing, but to them, it feels huge. And the key to it feeling huge to them is just they didn't expect it from you and you didn't need to do it. You just blew right through that line of where people usually say, well, that's more than I do for someone like you. Once you step over that line, once somebody gets a step over that line, everybody gets to step over that line. And then you're onto something.
I love that. I love that. I know that through the Paid Forward book and then the movie, you also built a foundation, the Paid Forward Foundation,
Yeah.
which really is, in my opinion, does
Many,
amazing
many years
things.
ago now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would love if you would share a little bit about the Paid Forward Foundation and what its vision and mission is and how people may be able to potentially get involved with that.
Well, you know, people can find the Pay Forward Foundation online, and can always contact us. We love to hear from people who have individual Pay It Forward ideas and projects. Sometimes there are ways that we can help each other. We like to hear from teachers who are teaching Pay It Forward in the classroom. In the past, we have had mini grant programs for classes, you know, who want to come up with their own Pay It Forward projects. We would like to get that. We're kind of in a way rebuilding and sort of starting over with new teams, and we want to get that going again. We've had a books project in the past where teachers can come to us for an inexpensive or even free classroom set of the Young Readers edition of the Pay It Forward book, because everybody knows teachers don't have a ton of money to spend on
Yeah.
books. And then there's also a lot of space for what else we could do. I mean, basically our vision is to promote the Pay It Forward idea, particularly in the next generation.
Hmm.
Because, you know, in the book and in the movie, it starts with a young person.
Yeah, I think that
Learns
that's
about
very
this in
significant.
school, and who is simply charged with an idea of creating world change. Kids that age are very, very powerful when it comes to their imagination and their lack of mental limitations. And so in a way that, in my vision for the foundation has always been very simple. My vision for the foundation is, if we could somehow make that a reality, where kids had that experience as they were coming of age, of realizing how powerful they are in the world and identifying what they want to change in the world and trying it out, how different would the next generation be? What would we then have when that generation moves into the government and the workforce? So that was always, you know, my dream and
I
what
couldn't agree with you more, because as we all know, the children definitely are our future. And I know that we have
oh, yeah.
teachers tuning in and students tuning in. I think that the biggest message that we can give is to empower them to recognize that there's so much that you have inside of you that you could bring into the world, and your age isn't a factor. But
Right.
you need
And
to
you can bring
continue
that
to
to the world
believe in
now.
yourself.
Right.
I
Yeah.
think that, right? I think as we get older, like you said, we stop having those dreams. We start seeing, oh, that's impossible. But when you're a kid, those
Yeah.
limitations, they're not
Nothing is
there. So
impossible. Yeah.
the kids that are watching right now, you are the people. You are the people that are going to change the world. But you have to believe enough in yourself
Yeah.
to just start creating and to
And it can
allow
be
your
now.
imagination.
I think we spend a lot of time telling kids what they can be later when they're adults.
And they could be it
But
now.
when it
Yeah,
comes to something like changing the world through kindness, you do not have to wait.
I
You
love
have
that.
all the power you need right now to change the world through kindness. As a matter of fact, people who witness an act of kindness by a class full of young students are often more inspired than they would be if an adult did the same thing. So
It's very
that's a
true.
lot of the point that I wanted to make, is you've got this power now. That's why I wrote this book about a 12-year-old changing the world.
And for those teachers that are tuning in or students that are tuning in, and if you've not read Pay It Forward, I highly recommend you checking it out. And for teachers utilizing the book in your classroom, I know that I've used it in my classroom. I was a teacher, a middle school teacher. I've shown the film in my classroom, and the discussions that came about from it were amazing. Having students talk about their dreams and try and figure out how they can start implementing them now. Again, like you said, you
Exactly,
don't
right
need to
now. Yeah.
wait. It's not like, oh, this is what I
Yep.
want to be when I grow up. You can change the world. You can impact positive change now, because it's not about doing the big things. It's about doing the small things that create a really big impact, sometimes bigger than you ever expected.
Yeah. I bet you anything that like a bunch of people in a nursing home, let's say, who their day is improved by visitors. I bet anything they'd rather get a visit from a kindergarten class than they would from me. And that's
100%.
magic.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
that's magic when kids that age do stuff like that.
It's really true. I mean, I'm sure you've received loads of stories connected to Paid Forward throughout the
Oh
years.
yeah.
Is there any, I mean, I know this is a really tough question, okay, but is there any one that pops out to you more than others that just really left an impression on you?
Yeah, they're actually kind of, it is a hard question because there were many, but yeah, there actually is one that comes immediately to mind. And that is, there was I don't actually remember how many years ago it was, but one year we started out doing a Pay It Forward award for a classroom. And the one that we chose was a class full of kids in Orange County. I think they were about second grade. And one of the students at a neighboring school, it was like the next door school was for kids with learning disabilities. And there was a Down syndrome boy whose family had had a house fire, and all their belongings were just destroyed, and they needed money, and so the teacher got up in front of this class and said, okay, who's going to step up? Well, the kids got up, and first of all, they emptied out their own bank accounts. There was one boy who was saving up to buy an Xbox, and he cleaned out his bank account and said, it's more important to help people.
Wow.
So they put in their own money. Then they started raising money around the school. Then they started going to local businesses, and they did a clothing drive. They got certificates for meals and things like that from the local businesses. And the day that I went down there to give them the award, there was an article about it in the Orange County Register in their newspaper. While I was there, some guy from a real estate office phoned in. They ended up raising like $1,500 in cash. And he said, I showed this article to everybody in my office, and we all said, if those kids can do it, we can do it. And they matched their $1,500.
Oh my gosh.
And then the class from the next year did a similar challenge because they were inspired by what they had done. That was just the most. And then, and then you have the picture of like this Down syndrome boy, like hugging the teacher because he's so thrilled that everybody stepped up to help him. I mean, that to me was just like the most shining example, not only of kids stepping up, but the people who look at that and go, like, it just changes them just to see it. And they start doing more themselves.
I got to tell you, that story really hits home for me because when I was 15, I had a fire in my house and we lost everything
Wow.
overnight. Unfortunately, I didn't have a similar experience to the one that you're sharing. It was a very, very lonely time, a very hard time, time of very, very dark depression. And so I could say from the other side that someone seeing you during those hard times in your life, especially like when your house, when all your belongings suddenly are just taken from you, what a difference it can make. So
and the family
that story really hit home for me.
Yeah, it was just, to me, it was just a perfect example of how a thing like that can look.
Wow. And the ripple that it creates, as we're celebrating World Kindness Week, and I mean, kindness, paying it forward, it's not something that's done once, just only 1 week during the year or one day during the year. It's something that's constant. It's opening our eyes and making choices. Every single second, we have choices that we can make to engage with people and to see them. And although that's true, and that's constantly all the time, during this week, what message would you want to leave those that are tuning in? What message would you want to give them in terms of not only what they take for this week of World Kindness Week, but a message that they can take throughout the course of their year of incorporating kindness and engaging with people and paying it forward in their own way? Is there a message that you would want to share with the world right now, with everything that's going on right now, all the craziness happening, all the uncertainty and the fear? What would you want to tell people?
Probably just, and I touched on this before, just, that wonderful Gandhi quote, be the change you want to see in the world. Just maybe don't think in such huge terms about what the world needs. We all despair that the world seems to need so much, and we don't know how to get it. If you could just think in terms of change in the world that much, by 1 act of kindness a day, by 3 acts of kindness on Thursday, and just know that if enough people do that, it's enough. I mean, I just cannot really overstate how important it is to let go of the idea that the contribution you make to the world has to be huge. Because when it's huge, you get overwhelmed and then you end up making no contribution at all. So just embrace small to medium world change. And just be really happy for a contribution that it may be small, but it's positive. And if enough people are out there doing it, it's going to really make a difference. So
And at
just,
the end of the
you know,
day,
just
you
make
never
the
know.
difference you can make.
And you never know who you're going to inspire along the way. I
Right.
mean,
And you don't know how much it'll change their life or how big it will be. But if you can just let go of the outcome and just say, okay, here's what I'm, you know, here's the stone I'm throwing into the pond today, and I won't get too caught up in where the ripples go. You'll be happier, and the world will get better. It may do it to a small degree, it may do it slowly, but all positive world change is good. It doesn't have to be everything changed, nothing left unchanged.
wow.
That's where people get the idea that people will say you can't change the world, because they're putting this definition on what it means to change the world. You can't not change the world. You can't come into this world and live a life and leave it unchanged. It's impossible. Of course you can change the world. The question is how and how much.
I love that. I'm so grateful that you're joining us on World Kindness Week
Oh,
and for the
absolutely, my pleasure.
contribution that you've also made into this world and the impact and the change that you've created. So, Catherine, happy World Kindness Week. Thank you so much for continuing to pay it forward in your own unique way. Guys, check out Pay It Forward. Check out the amazing work of the foundation and all of Catherine's books. They are thought-provoking. And like she said, they make you stop and think. And sometimes that's really what we need to do more than anything. So thank you
Thank
so much
you.
for joining
Thank
us.
you. It's my pleasure to be here.